851. Go ahead and disregard the checks. We got him at San Jacinto Pacific. Out there.
Investigators were overwhelmed by the carnage in a single case: arson, murder, fraud, suicide, and more. The bizarre trail of evidence left even seasoned investigators baffled. Could forensic science unlock its secrets? There is very little crime in Newman Lake, Washington, a small town outside of Spokane, which was why Bob Wood moved here after his divorce.
What attracted me to Bob was he seemed to have a lot of care for his children. He was a single father. I was a single mother at the time. We had a lot in common in that factor.
Bob had custody of his two children, 16-year-old Teresa and 11-year-old Christopher. For the Wood family, February 9, 1999 began like most other mornings. Teresa left for school around 8 a.m., Bob Wood left for work soon afterwards, and Christopher was the last one out of the house. Around 8:30, neighbors saw smoke coming out of the windows and called the fire department.
The principal from the school came right down to the house and told us that Chris had not come to school and that he may be in the fire.
Firefighters searched the home in a frantic effort to find him.
That sometimes kids hide in a building after they set a fire, and we didn't know whether he did that, whether he went and hid somewhere else in the house and was overcome by smoke.
I kind of figured that Christopher had accidentally set the fire, because a couple weeks before that, Bob had called me and said he was having problems with Christopher and matches. Christopher wanted to set fires.
But firefighters couldn't find him. Bob Wood learned about the fire while he was on his way to work. When he returned home, the center of the house was completely destroyed. Bob's first priority was to find his son Christopher, whom he believed was hiding out of fear.
He doesn't need to worry about the house or what happened here. He just needs to get himself home.
It was the middle of winter, so everybody was worried that Christopher might, if he was out hiding in the woods, that he could die of exposure. It gets cold in Spokane.
Neighbors and sheriff's deputies organized one of the biggest manhunts in the town's history. About 5 miles away, a motorist discovered Christopher's backpack along the side of the road, but there was no sign of Christopher. Meanwhile, investigators needed to find out whether the fire was arson. So they brought in an accelerant-sniffing dog to determine whether a flammable material was present. The dog found nothing. But investigators discovered where it started, in the family room.
There was a V pattern originating from the sofa, which was against a wall, and there was a very distinct line or mark of demarcation on the wall that pointed to a particular end of the sofa.
When a fire starts on a sofa, investigators usually suspect arson. For 2 days, police and volunteers searched for Christopher. Then, a snowplow driver found his body in a snowbank along a deserted road 50 miles away.
I remember it. I was brokenhearted.
There were ligature marks around Christopher's neck, evidence that he had been strangled.
It appeared that Christopher had not been murdered there, as there was very little disturbance in the snow, only enough to show that somebody had stopped there and dumped the body off the side of the road.
During the autopsy, forensic experts found no evidence that Christopher had started the fire.
Examination of Chris's hands showed no sooting or fire products on his hands. He had no sooting in his lungs, no carbon dioxide in his blood.
But investigators found a telling clue that Christopher had been abducted. His sneakers were on the wrong feet.
Chris was 11 years old. He wasn't prone to put his shoes on the wrong feet. But if you were dressing a lifeless body, facing it, you would put right to left and left to right. And that's apparently what happened.
Now there were two crimes to solve: arson and murder.
East Farms Elementary School put together a memorial for Christopher, and they invited all of us to go, and it was huge. And they gave me this book that they had put together.
Christopher Wood's classmates and teachers assembled a collection of their favorite stories and recollections of Christopher, an expression the family appreciated.
Some of the poems, one of them in particular, it makes me cry every time I read it.
Investigators vowed to find the person or persons responsible for the murder and the arson.
I think the underlying feeling in the neighborhood that there was a predator and that someone did abduct Chris Wood. That was a big fear amongst the people.
We have a database of registered sex offenders, and they had searched that database and had discovered some people in the general area.
Since the autopsy revealed no evidence Christopher had been sexually assaulted, it was unlikely the crime was sexually motivated. Investigators asked Bob Wood and his daughter Teresa about their activities on the morning of the fire. Teresa said she left for school at 8 o'clock. Bob said he left for work around 8:20. And Christopher was eating breakfast. He didn't normally leave for school until 8:30. None of the neighbors reported seeing Christopher that morning. Investigators began to question Bob Wood's actions on the morning of the fire. They remembered it took him a long time to get home after he learned about the fire.
It took him almost 2 hours to get home, and that would have been at most a 66-minute trip. Question is, how was that accounted for?
And there was something else. Investigators discovered that Bob was living well beyond his means. He earned about $100,000 a year selling real estate, but he spent much more.
He also put in a huge garage in the back that would take an RV and snowmobiles and all his little hobbies. He liked to do restore cars, and that was also in the back of the garage.
Investigators also learned that Bob had been fired from his job at a local real estate company a few weeks earlier.
Robert Wood had worked for them and had stolen over $100,000 worth of materials, and they told us to be very alert that this fire may be something he's intentionally setting for insurance purposes.
And Bob owned 3 life insurance policies on his son Christopher worth $80,000.
Well, Bob Wood gave a neighbor a briefcase, and in the briefcase were financial records, and there were life insurance policies on Chris and a picture of Chris. None of those items were sooted, indicating that they had been removed from the house prior to the fire.
Wood was known for keeping meticulous financial records. A clerk at a camera store called police to tell them how meticulous.
Bob had dropped off some film to be developed. I believe it was the day after the fire, and they were found to include photographs of the interior of his house, including before the fire, and shots from the same angle after the fire.
A remarkable coincidence.
It was really stupid to have taken before and after photographs of his house on the same roll of film.
Investigators searched Wood's garage for evidence. On the fender of Bob's sports car, they discovered what appeared to be stomach contents. They found similar stains in the back of the truck Bob was driving the day of the fire. Unfortunately, scientists cannot get a DNA profile from stomach contents.
I knew that the fluids in the stomach would destroy DNA, at least I strongly suspected that, and a couple of quick phone calls confirmed that. However, I ended up calling all over the country trying to find anybody that could tell me anything about the evidentiary value of vomit.
Investigators hoped that this biological material could tell them something. Investigators hoped the stomach contents found in the back of Bob Wood's truck and on the fender of his sports car would tell them something about what happened to Christopher Wood. So the samples were sent to forensic microscopy detective Bill Schneck, who examined the material with a polarized light microscope.
What I found were small little vegetative fragments, oat bran and flour particles and starch grains.
From these patterns, Schneck suspected they were unprocessed corn and wheat starch. To be certain, Schneck tested the samples with a solution of potassium iodine.
And when you put a small drop of this solution on the vomit material, the starches will turn kind of a purplish blue color.
The test was positive. Schneck knew that oat bran, corn, and wheat starch are common ingredients in breakfast cereals. He found the same biological material on the shirt Christopher was wearing on the day of the fire. Schneck found marshmallow mateys cereal in the Woods' kitchen, which is what Christopher's sister said he was eating on the morning he was killed.
After examining the vomit stains from the shirt, the truck, and the car, I concluded that they all were from the same source, and more than likely from the marshmallow mateys.
Investigators developed a theory about how Christopher's body was transported.
Christopher had been murdered in the morning, and Bob Wood's truck had an open bed, so we knew that he had to have concealed the body somehow. We started looking for the garbage cans at his place and found that there was only one there. Neighbors reported that he normally put 2 out on the curb.
So, where was the missing trash can?
We spoke to Bob's daughter and found out that the day after the fire, he had taken his truck to a car wash, washed it, including spraying out the bed of the truck.
Near the car wash, investigators found a discarded trash can, the same type as the one missing from Bob's home. But investigators had to be sure. Schneck noticed what appeared to be paint residue on both trash cans.
Well, I examined the paint from the Rubbermaid garbage can and found it contained titanium dioxide as one of the major inorganic ingredients. And I compared that to the paint overspray found on the garbage can at Robert Wood's house. And I found the paint particles, the composition was the same.
Schneck then used a scanning electron microscope to analyze what was inside the can. He found traces of vomit, consistent with Christopher's stomach contents, along with some shiny metallic particles. These particles matched the sequins on Christopher's backpack.
After examining the contents and all the trace debris on the Chris Wood's clothing and the material in the garbage can and in the backpack, I concluded that Chris Wood at one time was actually in the garbage can.
Even with this information, investigators needed more evidence to tie Bob Wood to his son's murder. They checked his cell phone records, which revealed Wood was near Christopher's body, 50 miles from home, when he was called about the fire.
In other words, it put him in the location where Chris was jettisoned at about the time that Chris would have been jettisoned.
Finally, investigators had to determine if the smoke and fire seen by Wood's neighbors at 8:30 could have been created by a fire set just 10 minutes earlier at 8:20, the time Wood said he left the house. The ATF purchased 3 sofas identical to the one in the Woods' home.
We wanted to see how the sofa would behave when exposed to fire. How fast would this sofa become totally involved? When would it reach its max heat release rate? And how much energy would the sofa produce?
Given the size of the Woods family room, the fire would have to generate at least 2,200 kilowatts of energy to engulf the room within a 10-minute period. Tests showed the burning sofa would generate more than enough energy in that time frame.
Mr. Wood said that he left at 8:20. Therefore, we concluded that Mr. Wood was present at the time the fire was starting.
Bob Wood was arrested and charged with arson and first-degree murder.
To me, it always amazes me that truth turns out to be stranger than fiction. You know, this is the worst case of arson for profit that I've ever seen in my career.
While incarcerated, Bob Wood insisted he was innocent.
I would never do anything to hurt my son. He was very special. He was a good boy, and he deserved to have a life. He really did.
Yet his ex-girlfriend said Wood didn't always treat Christopher kindly.
He was really hard on Christopher, and if Christopher did anything wrong, he would just immediately discipline him and just really lash out at him. But with Teresa, she was his little girl. So to me, there was a big disparity between how he treated the two.
Wood's excessive spending left him deep in debt. Making matters worse, he was fired from his job for embezzling close to $100,000. Prosecutors believe Bob killed Christopher for the $80,000 in life insurance. On a cold February morning, Wood waited until Teresa left for school and then killed his son. In the process, Christopher vomited, leaving behind the evidence which would later implicate his father. Bob finished dressing Christopher, but he put Christopher's shoes on the wrong feet. While carrying Christopher's body to his truck, Bob brushed against his sports car, inadvertently leaving his son's stomach contents on the fender. He put his son's body in the trash can in the back of his truck. Bob went back inside, set the sofa on fire, grabbed his son's backpack, and left the house at 8:20. Bob dumped his son's body in a snowbank 50 miles from home, and here he received the cell phone call telling him of the fire.
Hello?
On his drive back, Bob threw Christopher's backpack along the side of the road. He washed his truck, but failed to remove all of the biological evidence, and he discarded the trash can near the car wash. The forensic paint analysis proved the discarded trash can was from Bob's home, and the biological evidence proved Christopher had been inside.
I really don't know why he killed him. The insurance money wasn't enough to get him out of trouble on Christopher. I do not know why, unless he was just absolutely pure evil.
Just before Wood was scheduled to go on trial, he hanged himself in his jail cell.
The closest Bob Wood ever came to confessing was discovered after he had killed himself. We received a phone call from a psychic who said that she had visited with him in jail, and he told her at that time that there were only 3 people who knew what happened to Christopher, and that was him, Christopher, and God.
Shelley Kellogg rejected Bob Wood's wedding proposal just days before the arson and murder. Some in law enforcement believe Shelley may have been the original target, but the breakup prevented it.
The cops do believe that if I would have married him, I would have been killed too. I don't know if that's true, it's all speculation. But they believed it would have been much worse. Documents had been missing from my house. Personal documents, Social Security information, Social Security card was missing.
Although Wood's suicide precluded the trial, prosecutors believe they would have won a conviction.
Forensic scientists are amazing. I've been doing this for 20+ years, and there's always something new that they bring to a case.
There's a lot of personal, pleasure involved in helping to solve a crime. Of course, I'm one small piece of a larger puzzle, but in this particular case, I think a lot of the work I did was, very important. Feel pretty good about that.
There were no witnesses to see Christopher's body being pulled out of the house. There were no witnesses to his body being dumped down an embankment. It was science, basically, that solved this case. And yeah, that's fascinating stuff.